on the House floor as a conservative Republican from the South, very much in support of STEM education being part of the Primary and Secondary Education Act of America. And so then I left, and these two brilliant engineers from my hometown were launching Learning Blade, and I had the privilege of joining them as their board chair. And along the road, we have met a lot of really outstanding people, which brings me to the introduction of our two special guests today that are on this panel. Dr. Allison Roberts from Arkansas is the education liaison, heads up the computer science initiative for Governor Asa Hutchinson. Last year was the main person, the initiator and the leader of the National Computer Science Summit that was held in Little Rock. The first ever National Computer Science Summit was held in Little Rock last year, and she really put that on. We were honored to partner with her and support that at Learning Blade. We had 35 states in attendance. We were going to repeat that this June in Greenville, South Carolina, because the governor there is following this lead and wanted to host it, but obviously COVID-19 has pushed that back. But COVID-19's changed a lot of things, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So Allison is going to be one of our special guests, and then Nick Moore from the state of Alabama. He's the senior education policy lead, education policy advisor for Governor Kay Ivey, who was an educator herself before she entered the world of politics. And so these are two governors that are way out front here from the South, leading on education reform and competitiveness, enhancing the workforce, and they've got really good, solid education leaders. So as we get into the questions for these two leaders from Arkansas and Alabama, I just want to kind of set the stage and say, from our perspective at Learning Blade, and I'm just the board chair, but we have sure seen a change in the way education is going to be delivered and is being delivered because of the distance learning needs of COVID-19. In fact, the GEAR grants that came from the CARES Act, which was really the second rescue bill that the Congress passed and was signed into law, put billions of dollars out to the states, earmarked, dedicated for distance learning, because students that can't return to the classroom need to continue their education. And so a lot of it's going to be delivered online, a lot of it's going to be delivered at home. So we want to talk about those trends and go to these leaders at the state level and see exactly what's happening there. So Allison, if I could just start with you and talk about things that Governor Hutchinson has done in the past, because at the national governor's level, he's like recognized as the education leader. Reform, he's been out there for 5 years blazing a trail on coding, computer science, enhancing the requirements from computer science education at secondary level. I know a lot about that, but I don't want to get ahead of you. Can you just catch us up on all the innovations that you've seen in Arkansas and how this moment seems to change things for you?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here and also to talk about some of the great work we're doing in Arkansas and to brag on Governor Asa Hutchinson. One of the things that I think set Arkansas in a good spot when this COVID crisis hit was we had legislation passed in 2017 that created AMI, Alternative Means of Instruction days. So we already had that in the bank, and districts were able to already have about 5 days established in the case of an emergency. Now, we didn't really think of a pandemic, but we were considering, weather emergencies or short-term, facility needs. So we had the basis of what digital learning or remote learning might look like. We really quickly got some waivers and extended those AMI days. So we had initially, a good 2 weeks of a start. The governor has always been really interested in making sure that we have equity and accessibility. And so that was one of our first concerns were, how do we ensure that every student across the state has the ability to learn remotely? And if not, what do we do at the state level to make sure that that is happening? And so that was a slow process. We looked at, if we don't have immediate internet access, how do we can get those packets of learning developed and delivered to kids until we do have those means addressed. So we have been pretty successful to make sure that we've got connectivity, and then the areas that we don't, we're recognizing that's where part of our GEARS funds will go to, is making sure that we have some of those things covered. We had really creative ideas come out from our institutions of higher ed, where they developed Wi-Fi parking lots. We put some Wi-Fi on school buses, and we're able to try to drive those around to locations. We've had a lot of community support with meal service as well as hotspot delivery to make sure that students had the ability to get online. I think another thing that Arkansas has really been a leader in as far as our state needs was, how do we meet not only the academic needs of students, but we're also looking at the social, emotional, and just sort of living day-to-day needs. And so we've been focused on meal delivery and making sure that students with special needs are addressed, and Zoom meetings. And this has been a learning process, but we have really, I think, learned a lot in the past few weeks that I think is going to help us move forward.
Well, that's a great overview. Thank you. We'll come back to some of those things here in just a minute. So going to Nick Moore. Nick, you've been at this a long time. We've known you for several years now. Governor Ivey has just made a major commitment to computer science and STEM education in the state of Alabama. But we've also heard from you since COVID really changed the paradigm of delivery, that you're talking about maybe expanding some of the curricula for the state through distance learning. Can you catch us up on innovations that Alabama's looking at and where Governor Ivey wants to go, what you're doing every day on this diversification of your curricula?
Thank you, Congressman Wamp. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and thank you for joining us. Governor Ivey is committed to creating a P20W system for every student in the state of Alabama, starting with our youngest learners all the way through the workforce, and creating multiple pathways for individuals and multiple on and off ramps for not only our high school students, but also incumbent workers and dislocated workers and folks that may be now struggling with re-entering a labor market that is much different than the one that they left just a few months previous. So one thing that Governor Ivey is really glad that we were able to do is to begin the partnership with Learning Blade a couple of years before COVID-19, because what that's allowed us to do is to set up a virtual college and career exploration platform that helps break down distance and geography as a barrier to helping individuals understand what occupations are available, and not only to know what's available, but what are in demand, and then how their interests and aptitudes are aligned to those opportunities. So we all know that when we get back to work and everyone is re-entering the labor market, we're going to be looking to help people upskill from occupations that maybe were less resilient or more exposed to COVID-19 as those industries are recovering, and the occupations that are now more in demand due to public health needs and advanced manufacturing needs. Folks are going to need a seamless way for not only to be able to utilize our one-stop system and our public workforce system, but a way to get beyond the what is in some ways an anecdotal, it almost is like a Rorschach test, or somebody sitting there answering a few cute questions, and it's supposed to spit out what they're supposed to do with the rest of their life. So we know that something like Learning Blade allows somebody to have a more organic and really empirical understanding of what their interests are and how that is aligned to the labor market. So that's how we're currently working to expand Learning Blade in the state of Alabama, and using this not just as a tool for our K-12 students who have taken advantage of it now for a year, but also our adult learners.
I've kind of got this 30 minutes broken down into a few categories, and the next one I'm jumping to is sort of best practices. But I was just thinking while Nick was talking, and if you got any best practices that you might want to share with other states, because a lot of this, when a crisis like this hits, states are making changes as fast as they can, and they learn things that might be real helpful to other states. And I know I was in government for 9/11 at the federal level, and then I was still there in 08 when the economy really took a major shot. And in both cases, I learned a whole lot. And so if there's anything that you can share in terms of what you've learned and best practices, but also as much as you can share how it's impacted your budget. Here in Tennessee, we were flush with cash. The state of Tennessee was before COVID. We had a lot of money. We had a surplus. They were projecting 2.5% growth in the coming year. And now it's just the other way around. I mean, they had to go back and meet and modify their budget. Can you give examples, Dr. Roberts, of where Arkansas is and maybe examples of best practices or things that have changed that you've learned?
Sure. I think, Arkansas was similar in the fact that we felt like we were in a really good spot with our budget, and we were moving in towards some great sort of ease and ability and some flexibility, and then COVID hit. And so the budget crisis has really created a big area of concern, not only for our K-12, but also our higher ed. And the continued concern grows as we're looking at, the impact that's going to have even from now further down the road. So I think there's a lot of speculation on what things are going to look like in the future. I think one thing for certain is education is not going to be the same as it was. And I think that's a real positive thing in some regards, because teachers and schools and students and parents are learning that the online learning or digital learning or any kind of learning platform is not such a scary place anymore. And their parents are actually looking at these resources such as Learning Blade and some other things that we've given them sort of accessibility to, and understanding that it's not a game or a playtime on the computer, that it's really valuable enrichment and activities that are moving them towards higher learning. I think some of the things that we've noticed is a lot of school districts are really seeking out what to do to enhance their own curriculum. We're providing the core curriculum and students are in instruction time, but what do we do to enrich them and keep them engaged after that happens? How do we continue to look for resources? And so we've got schools being really creative with what that looks like. Teachers are creating Zoom classrooms, and they're really communicating with kids at a different level that I think has been very interesting. Our computer science department that's housed at our Department of Ed has created a kind of a computer science coffee shop where they're open with a Zoom camera all day for computer science teachers to drop in and ask questions and get resources to really continue providing enriching curriculum to their students, to get some tips from the experts or just get some ideas on how to do that. Arkansas was very fortunate through the funding from the governor to build up some cyber ranges, and our computer science department at the Department of Education through Anthony Owen, his leadership, have helped really put some learning lessons on how to enter into cyber range and kind of given some tutorials for kids to know how to access that. So we've got some things happening in the state that I think have been really put into play because of this time period. And teachers are having time to kind of begin to explore and see what that looks like. You mentioned before, and I failed to talk about, the governor's interest in computer science has also really began to emerge beyond the National Summit last year. So we were fortunate to have that. And we really got some great feedback from leaders across the nation. And because of that feedback and kind of where we were left after some discussions and some thought, the governor put together through an executive order a computer science task force that is looking at next steps. So beyond K-12, how do we continue that matriculation into higher ed? How do we go into workforce readiness? How do we make sure that our industry is staffed with the type of workforce and skill set that is needed to supplement our state? So that task force is actually meeting via Zoom throughout this whole process, and we're really learning on, through educators, what needs are we having even now? What needs do we need to enhance? So we're learning as we're going, and I think that's very valuable throughout this process. So I think one of the things that we want to make sure we highlight as we move forward within the state is how do we take students from where they are at this point and move them forward into whatever the next phase looks like, whether we go back to school remotely or in person or whatever. How are we making sure our students are prepared? And I think we're giving them lots of resources through enrichment programs that will help.
Before we go to Nick, you reminded me of something when you talked about how a crisis like this causes people to think, hey, distance learning is not so scary. It's not bad. It can actually work. And so people get used to things. And it reminded me, since the Computer Science National Summit in September in Arkansas, that Jamie Dimon of Goldman Sachs puts out this report every New Year of 10 things to look for in the coming year, 10 things that need to happen in order for us to be more competitive. And one of those this year was basically kind of break the mindset about a 2-year degree. Basically we have to shift parents' acceptance that a 2-year degree or a certificate might actually be a really good education for their children, so that they're not all stuck in this 4-year degree mindset. He said that had to happen in something like 70% of all their new hires at the first of this year only required a 2-year degree. Those are the kind of changes that come out of a time like this, where we have to reevaluate education kind of from the top to the bottom, inside and out, what works, what doesn't work, and where do we need to go. But that's another one kind of on the same front that you talked about. So Nick, let's go back to you and talk about budgets and best practices or innovations that you're seeing during this crisis.
Yes, and I'd like to lead off by commenting on the point you just made. We believe that competency-based education and learning is going to be accelerated by several years due to our present circumstances. We had an initiative to better integrate education in the economy, breaking down career pathways by skills, and then linking individual skills with industry recognized credentials and other credentials of value, so that we don't replace the credit hour, the time unit of measurement of learning, but to make a complementary system to where we can make degrees more modularized, and then also to give folks prior learning assessments and credit and articulated credit for what they know and what they can demonstrate mastery of. And things like Learning Blade and other tools that allow students to earn badges and micro-credentials, that really, I guess in a South Alabama way to put it, gets the camel's nose under the tent for students so that they begin understanding the value of earning credentials and mastering competencies. And so that's one best practice I would mention, is helping to develop a credential currency and a culture of credential attainment from a very early age among students, even in pre-K, in early elementary school. But beyond that, looking at public-private partnerships. One of the ways that we were able to bring Learning Blade to all of our students in Alabama was through a partnership with the Boeing Corporation. They partnered with Governor Ivey, and were able to provide that to all of our students. And then to a point that that was brought up as well, the need to bring together a host of folks throughout the state, including folks in business and industry, to develop a computer science task force, if this is something your state has not yet done, and develop some recommendations. Work with code.org. There's many stakeholders out there that can help your state along. Governor Ivey was proud to sign into law the Computer Science for Alabama Act this past legislative session, that now is going to bring high quality computer science courses, but also the professional learning experiences that are going to be needed to help our current in-service STEM teachers, and also a new cadre of computer science teachers through enhanced certification pathways for computer science. So if we're looking at ways to also help get beyond the traditional 4x4 model of learning, to where we're allowing students to earn credit for computer science and maybe a math or science time, that's also going to allow a student to be maybe an apprentice, earn their associate degree or industry recognized credentials, and maybe still have somewhat of a life and to be in the band or play football or something like that.
Remind all of those on this webinar that through the chat box you can ask a question as well. If you have a question for any of the three of us, the host will actually record those. questions to us. If you have questions, go to that chat box. Back to Dr. Roberts. Are there any unique partnerships? Now, Nick mentioned the state of Alabama and Boeing's partnership. Are there any unique partnerships in Arkansas, or what I would just call good ideas that are coming out of this moment where education is changing? I know Arkansas has several sort of well-known corporate headquarters there, like Walmart for the whole world is in Bentonville. So are there any partnerships that you want to highlight in Arkansas that y'all are tapping into, or that Governor Hutchinson has established?
Well, you're right. We do have a lot of great industry partners that are teaming up with our state for multiple different reasons. I think in education, you know, right now our most valuable partnership is with our PBS channel and our public broadcasting, because we have gotten a lot of curriculum support and publications and distribution of content through our public network. And that's been a big win for districts across the state, so that kids can access curriculum components, which are then, some of the episodes are recorded by some of our teachers of the year, which I have to brag on. They're tremendous, that they've jumped in and really taken hold of this time period. And I've coordinated with districts to look at content and curriculum, so it's published that way. And then it's also via smartphones or any kind of digital learning component, iPads, tablets, things like that. So that partnership has been well. As far as, you know, funding and moving forward, we the governor has been gracious enough to set aside some annual funds that really support this computer science initiative and moving forward and what that looks like. And, you know, the partnerships we have with our industry as far as careers and modalities and moving students into a pathway that's not necessarily the traditional 4-year avenue has really come about also because of our legislators being so supportive of how we fund those secondary career centers. So we're really looking at what are our industry needs, and then how are we funding those within our secondary career centers, our junior colleges, or our kind of go-tos for kids that are still in college, but I mean still in high school and take a college class. Part of our initiative also is really looking at, do we have, and Nick mentioned this before, the stackable career components and degree plans. So can a student leave with an associate's degree or a trade skill that's ready to be hired from our real strong supporters? We've got Tyson, we have Walmart that are really invested in our economic trade and training programs in our states. So can they have that in addition to then how does that work with down the line going and get re-credentialed, upskilled into a degree? I think one of the interesting things, as you mentioned, this kind of online learning comfortability is coding in itself. So Governor Hutchinson really tries to go out on coding tours every season. Unfortunately, we had to postpone the spring. But he speaks to 8 to 10 schools per season, and now we're at our 10th season, and he's at 80 schools that he's visited, and he talks to the kids in the district and in the community about what computer science provides, what does coding provide for their future, and it is that remote ability to access a job or learning or anything else from your home, you know, across the world, really. And so I think this remote learning is really bringing that into a little bit more hands-on practice, because they can see the application of what that looks like. So we're not geographically bound in, you know, rural Arkansas, that someone can access learning from all over. So all of these opportunities, I think, are really being enhanced and individualized through this whole experience.
Before I go to Nick, I just want to kind of highlight what you just talked about, and that is the rural areas traditionally are a little more conservative. I don't want to get into the politics of the whole thing, but we have seen that where governors lead, regardless of the ideology of the lawmakers, they will follow that governor's lead, because, I mean, rural people need this distance learning more in many ways than urban people do. So this really fires up a traditional base of support that really wasn't there for some of these innovations in education until they realized that it's their people that are actually going to benefit directly. going to you, Nick, we're running out of time here, but I want to see if there's anything you wanted to add on unique partnership or good ideas before I get to the closing question. Did you have anything to add to what she was saying, Nick, there?
Yes. What I wanted to mention is one of the primary vehicles that we are able to identify the in-demand occupations and where we should focus scarce secondary and post-secondary resources, everything from college and career exploration dollars, now that we can in next year use Perkins 5 for career exploration all the way down to 5th grade, is to use our labor market information through sector strategies that are composed of members of business and industry that work directly with members of our State Department of Education and community college system in each of our 16 career clusters. And we call this the Committee on Credentialing and Career Pathways. And they have an iterative process annually that identifies the in-demand occupation using what we call the 5-star rubric, and happy to share some of this with folks that may want to follow up on it. And then we attach industry recognized credentials, and we've got a partnership with Credential Engine that then helps us to align, as I mentioned earlier, and as Dr. Roberts mentioned, this need to create stackability and to create a career pathway. This allows us then to use tools like Learning Blade as students develop their career interests and aptitudes. Maybe in 8th or 9th grade, we're using our career awareness course then to help them say, okay, well, we know now over 3 or 4 years of you using Learning Blade what you're very interested in. Now here is a list of all of the in-demand occupations. Here's the path that takes you from 9th grade, from step A to B to C, to getting into that career. And it's not mercurial, it's not opaque anymore to our students. Guidance counselors, career coaches know how to gear that student and create partnerships with folks in the business community that may want to employ that young person in an apprenticeship, as an in-school youth apprenticeship. So using data to help us guide these decisions and using tools like Learning Blade has been key.
Well, both my parents are from Alabama, so you make me really proud. You talked about South Alabama a minute ago. When people say LA, I have to ask them if they're from the West Coast or lower Alabama. You know, I have to be really careful in the South what they're referring to. I think I'm going to have to give Dr. Roberts the closing word because we're sort of at the bottom of the hour. You mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to raise it again and see if this is how you want to close, and that is how this pandemic changes the way we deliver education. Are there any closing comments or broadening of what you talked about? It definitely is going to. The question is how, and in what ways can we make it better through this crisis as opposed to us falling back in education? We advance because of what this crisis makes us do or forces us to do.
Well, and thank you for that opportunity. I think, so the Arkansas Department of Education has put out a really great AMI guide, which they kind of modeled after a few other states, but in it has been a resource. And one of the interesting things in it, it talks about professional development for teachers moving forward. I mean, there were some teachers that were really prepared for online learning, and then there were some that was the farthest thing from their mind. So where do we go from that? How do we really enhance instruction, and how do we look at moving forward with some sort of a digital platform so students can begin accelerating what they do? Because I think moving forward, if we have blended learning and we're able to comfortably address blended learning in the classroom, then there's a seamless flow. So all professional development starting May 1, the Department of Education has agreed that will count for the next school year. So teachers can begin training now on learning how to deliver instruction via remote learning, digital platforms, and things like that. So hopefully the intention is that the next school year starts with some sort of a range of approaches. So it's not either in-person or computer. There's some sort of a middle ground that's being approached, whether it's during the normal school day or after school, but resources are going to begin to be embedded into the curriculum so students are able to begin that competency, that 21st century skill of learning how to research and activate their minds beyond just that intentional face-to-face delivery model. So how do we use this experience and this time period to move us forward to really navigate students' learning abilities, increase that rigor in the classroom, increase that research ability, and begin, breaking down the walls of a schoolroom or a school district to bring in all these additional resources. So we're really gearing towards how do we train teachers to feel comfortable doing that? How do we really begin to create sort of an avenue where all of these resources are kind of gathered together and categorized and placed in easy options and, given to not only teachers but parents and students. So we just are becoming a really wider audience to a much bigger realm of possibilities.
Well, so the call's been recorded. There will be notes. There was one chat question, and I know we're over our time, that I wanted to throw back at both of y'all, and that was really about after-school programs. If you had any suggestions about how to move forward with after-school programs and how they fit in helping prepare students for career education, and this is from an after-school educator who's on here. Let's finish with an answer there. Nick, do you have anything for that teacher?
We are blessed in the state of Alabama to have a very strong Title IV community in our Alabama after-school network. Partners very strongly with our civil society and our network of YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, and we understand that extending the school day and having multiple opportunities for students to learn and to exercise their different learning styles is key, particularly in a time like this. That's the very unfortunate thing, is that due to some of the restrictions on movement and some of the activities that we cherish the most have been very much curtailed. However, that's going to be a big part of our conversation about as we reopen the state of Alabama and we get back to normal, about how we can ensure that our students not only are being able to mitigate the summer slide that they normally get, but also this extended COVID-19 slide that they're now experiencing in our civil society and our after-school network and Title IV partners. We're going to be having to think very creatively about how we do an even stronger job of integrating that with our Title I resources as we get into May and June.
So as we were on this webinar, another release comes out from the U.S. Department of Education that $13 billion in emergency coronavirus relief to support education K-12 is coming out of Washington. So we talked about opportunities. There is a silver lining in the middle of the storm, and that is the resources from the federal government, albeit all borrowed money, is coming to a place near you soon. And so we need to innovate at that state level, make this work as best we can, move towards distance learning. Who knows what the fall is going to bring, but we do know what the spring brought. And that is the need to change and modify and adapt. You've done a really good job. We thank about 100 people are on this webinar. We thank you very much for your time. We can't keep you any longer, but it's been an honor for this recovering politician to be in your presence, albeit virtually. I think my IQ is definitely higher now than it was when I woke up this morning because of y'all. So thank you all. Let's stay connected and let's continue to move the ball down the field on education, particularly from the distance learning front. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. Thank you so much, Mr. Moore. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.